Over the many years of collecting tales of the supernatural, one story has never left me. The story began many years ago. The man who relayed this frightening episode swears blind to its authenticity. The events of the night in question he cannot explain, yet still today he recalls with an air of hesitance. A building exists in Dalmeny Street, Leith, with a tragic legacy. The Royal Scots Drill Hall, constructed in 1901, served as a base for the 7th Leith Battalion of the Royal Scots Guards. On the morning of May the 22nd, 1915, a group of Territorial Army troops would leave the hall and board a train. The men set out to travel to join the war effort in Gallipoli. They would change at Liverpool and then board a ship where they would travel overseas. But on this morning, a solitary event would lead to a terrible catastrophe. At 6:38 a.m. on the morning of May the 22nd, a manual error on the railway line would soon occur. The Liverpool-bound train collided with a stationary transport on wrongly scheduled tracks. The signalman changed the signal box at the remote location of Quinton's Hill, Dumfries, in error that morning. The impact of the speeding train would cause a devastating scene, resulting in many of its passengers being killed. A third train, travelling north from London, would also collide with the wreckage, resulting in a disastrous scenario. Flames engulfed the carriages, resulting in massive casualties that day. The aftermath of the tragedy would be listed as the worst train disaster in British history and forever known as the Quinton's Hill train disaster. The bodies of the deceased were transported to nearby Gretna Green and laid out in fields beneath a sea of ghostly white sheets. The terrible loss of life would affect a generation of Leith residents. The deceased soldiers would come to be known as the Leith Boys. The military guard transported the bodies of the soldiers back to the Dalmeny Street Drill Hall, where they would be prepared for burial. The chilling display of a sea of white sheets masking the dead would bedeck the desolate hall that once housed the dead it now sheltered. Interment commenced on May the 24th, with the deceased transported along neighbouring Pilring Street to nearby Rosebank Cemetery. A 4-hour service would see the bodies lying in a mass grave that day. The people of Leith did not recover from the devastation that took their sons that day. Over the coming years, the drill hall on Dalmeny Street continued as a base for the Royal Scots Regiment. Sometime in the late 1990s, I would encounter a man with a chilling tale to tell. My contact, his name I shall not relay, worked alongside his wife as auxiliary staff at the Dalmeny Street Drill Hall. The building was used infrequently and in the early stages of decommissioning. It was the weekend, and his wife was out celebrating her birthday with friends. The drill hall sat entirely vacant, aside for the presence of the man and his 1-year-old son. The family's accommodation sat in a separate upstairs section above the drill hall. With the young boy fast asleep, the man prepared for a peaceful evening in front of the television. The living room window overlooked the vast confines of the hall. It was here that the man noticed something peculiar that evening. His attention was drawn to movement downstairs in the hall. He scrutinised the darkness from the window but could see nothing downstairs. The fading light of the late spring evening relayed through the glass roof panels, yet nothing now moved below except shadows of trees. A few moments later, he noticed movement once again. The now anxious man left the room and ventured downstairs to the drill hall area. He stood for a moment and stared into the darkness, the hall now desolate and silent. The sound of nearby traffic from outside remained the only constant sound to be heard. Suddenly, he was startled. There was the movement before him, slowly and steady, from the back of the hall. Now anxious, he called out with a slightly trembling yet authoritative tone. "Who's there? The building's closed!" he called, but there was no reply. Still there was silence within the hall, yet the now thoroughly anxious man continued to stare into the darkness. Something was moving. Hesitantly, he began slowly walking across the polished floor. The sound of his footsteps squeaked slightly across the highly polished expanse. As he drew nearer, he could make out the same constant movement from the corner of the room, yet nothing replied to his call. He drew closer and closer to the shape. The light from the roof cascaded in shadows from the building's beams, fragmenting shimmers of light upon the rear wall. Suddenly, the man was alerted to a large bang from the rear of the hall. Startled by the sound, he turned and looked towards the opposite side of the building. It was the area of his accommodation, where his son slept. The light from the living room window, still and without motion, displayed alarming, unexpected movement. The ceiling light was now moving. Something was in the room. He raced upstairs to the family flat, instinctively to the room where his son slept. The child was fast asleep. Slowly and with trepidation, he walked through the darkness of the hall and towards the living room area. The lampshade moved slowly yet steadily, with the glow of the television the only light present. His breathing now increased, and his palms were cold with sweat. He switched on the light and noticed that something had moved. Objects from a bookcase in the corner of the room now lay upon the floor. It was his wife's birthday card. Beside it was a large book. The dark-coloured, hardback journal lay open upon the carpet. Hesitantly, he lifted the book but could not recognise the substantial-sized tome. He studied the content. It featured a list of names, catalogued and dated, an exact date present for each entry. It was a list of the dead soldiers who lost their lives in the Quinton's Hill rail disaster, the worst train crash in British history. The 22nd of May. It was the same date as his wife's birthday. It was her birthday today. The very same day. The falling book and the chilling coincidence continue to puzzle him even to this day. What moved the book that night was the relevance to the open chapter and the list of the deceased. Who or what he encountered that day in the Dalmeny Street drill hall remains unknown. Soon after, the family would cease their duties as building caretakers, and the drill hall would quickly decommission. Today, the building is a multi-event space known as Out of the Blue Drill Hall. Whether the chilling events from the 1990s have ever occurred again is unknown, but one thing is for sure. If you are alone in the drill hall in the fading light, look into the darkness if you dare. You never know who or what you might just see, standing at the rear of the building, in the corner of the Dalmeny Street Drill Hall.